the man everyone knew as powerful, hadn't slept through a full night in over 3 years. By day, William Langford signed deals worth millions, his name featured in Forbes, and his face plastered across the covers of business magazines. But by night, when the champagne glasses stopped clinking and the penthouse lights dimmed, William sat alone outside his daughter's bedroom, hoping just once to hear her voice. He never did. Not since that rainy October morning 3 years ago when his wife Rachel kissed their daughter goodbye and drove off into the storm. She never came back. The accident made headlines. Drunk driver, instant collision. Rachel Langford, beloved philanthropist and former concert pianist, was pronounced dead at the scene. And their daughter Ella, who was only 3 at the time, went completely mute the moment she heard the news. No crying, no screaming, not even a whisper. She just stopped. William tried everything. Specialists from Switzerland, music therapy in Vienna, behavioral therapists in New York, art therapy in Tokyo. Nothing worked. She was physically healthy. No damage to her vocal cords. No neurological concerns. She just refused to speak. One doctor had quietly told William that selective mutism caused by trauma could last indefinitely, a term that haunted him. So instead of waiting, William brought the world to Ella. He built her a private greenhouse filled with butterflies, hired a pony, installed a miniature planetarium in her bedroom ceiling, gave her anything she touched, looked at, or pointed to. Still silence. The only time she seemed remotely curious was during their short drives around town, when they passed ordinary parks where ordinary children played. She would glance out the window for just a few seconds longer. But by the time William pulled over, Ella would already look away. Until one Thursday afternoon, something changed. It was supposed to be a business call. His driver took a wrong turn and ended up in a working-class neighborhood outside the city. Tired of the tension, William dismissed his security team and asked to walk with Ella through the nearby Crescent Park, a small, slightly overgrown public space. No guards, no cameras, no schedule. Just trees, birds, the creaking of old swings, and the sound of a distant ice cream truck. Ella stood frozen when they entered. William thought she'd protest, try to turn around. But she didn't. She wandered quietly toward the sandbox and sat. Not on the edge, not on the slide. Just down on the soft earth, her tiny hands trailing the sand like a paintbrush across silence. William stood nearby, arms crossed, trying not to hover, but he was watching every breath. Minutes passed. Then something happened that made him forget how to breathe. A boy appeared, around 6 or 7. Black, skinny, messy curls, shirt too big for his frame. No shoes. A small backpack with a broken zipper hanging from one shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't even look at William. He just walked up to Ella and sat down beside her. No introduction, no hesitation, just a calm presence. He picked up a twig and started doodling circles in the dirt. Ella didn't move away. William stiffened, unsure whether to intervene. His security instincts kicked in, but so did his curiosity. He watched as the 2 children sat side by side, saying nothing, doing nothing. But something was happening. Something invisible. The boy, who William would later learn was named Micah, glanced at Ella's shoes, then at the butterflies embroidered on her socks. He smiled, picked a leaf off the ground, and tore it gently into butterfly wings. He held it out to her. Ella didn't take it. But she didn't look away either. She stared at the torn leaf as if it were speaking a language she'd almost forgotten. When it was time to go, William reached out his hand. Ella hesitated. She turned back and looked at the boy once more. Her lips didn't move. But William saw something in her eyes. A flicker. Not joy. Not sadness. Recognition. The next morning, William didn't expect anything to change. He still woke up at 5:00 a.m., still poured his black coffee in silence, and still found Ella sitting in her sunroom staring at the birds like she always did. But when he asked her gently, "Would you like to go to the park again today?" she blinked twice and gave him the slightest nod. It was the first time she'd ever responded to a question without being prompted twice. He tried not to let his hopes rise. Still, he canceled all his meetings for the day. That afternoon, they returned to Crescent Park. And just like the day before, Ella made a quiet beeline toward the same dusty patch of earth. The boy was already there, Micah. He was drawing again this time, a lopsided rocket ship with mismatched stars. His knees were dirty, and the same broken zipper dangled from his backpack. But when Ella approached, his face lit up like he'd been expecting her. He didn't say a word. He just scooted over and made space for her in the dirt. Ella sat down. Closer this time. William stood under a tree nearby, arms crossed, watching every second unfold with the caution of a man who'd been disappointed too many times. Again, no words were exchanged between the kids, not even a gesture. But William saw Ella's shoulders soften. Her fingers mimicked Micah's movements in the dirt. She traced stars next to his rocket ship. She smiled barely, but it was real. And when the clouds rolled in and a breeze began to stir the leaves, Ella didn't flinch. She stayed. They came back the next day. And the next. And the next. Within a week, it had become a ritual. Every afternoon, Ella would walk to the same spot with a bag of crackers and sit down beside Micah. Sometimes they drew pictures. Sometimes he'd pull something from his backpack, a bouncy ball, a plastic dinosaur missing a leg, a folded paper crane, and offer it to her. She never took anything, but she always looked, always watched. She began to copy him. If he stacked stones, she did too. If he leaned back against the tree, she mirrored his posture. He never touched her, never asked anything of her, just sat in stillness. Exactly the way she needed. And William noticed something else. Ella started humming, not loudly, just tiny little melodies under her breath as they drove home. Songs Rachel used to play on the piano, fragments of lullabies. It was barely sound, but it was more than silence. And William's heart broke all over again, not from sadness, but from hope. He had to know more about this boy. The next afternoon, as Ella sat in the grass beside Micah, William approached cautiously. He didn't want to interrupt whatever fragile rhythm the kids had built. So he waited for a moment when Micah stood up to grab a stick from the other side of the sandbox. "Hi there," William said. The boy glanced at him, blinked, then said hi. His voice was clear, polite. A little hoarse, like he wasn't used to using it much. "I'm Ella's dad," William offered. "I've seen you here a few times." "What's your name, Micah?" "Nice to meet you, Micah." The boy gave a small nod. He had an old soul, eyes that had seen more than they should have at his age. "You come here a lot every day," Micah replied. "Do you live nearby?" "Yeah. Me and my grandma. Down past the laundromat." William nodded. "What do you and Ella do out here?" he asked, not accusatory, just curious. Micah shrugged. "Nothing." William raised a brow. "Doesn't look like nothing. She doesn't talk," Micah said simply. "But that's okay." "You don't mind another shrug?" "I don't like talking much either." William smiled despite himself. There was something about this boy that disarmed him. Honest, still, not afraid of silence. As he turned to walk away, Micah said something unexpected. "She's not broken, you know." William stopped. "I never said she was." "I know," Micah replied. "But people look at her like she is. I don't. I just wait." Then he walked back to Ella, who was watching them both. And for the first time since Rachel's funeral, she smiled at her father. That evening, William drove to the neighborhood behind the park. He passed rows of run-down buildings, chain-link fences, and rusted cars parked under flickering streetlights. Eventually, he found the small 2-story brick home Micah had described. It was old but neat. A modest garden of wilting tulips lined the steps. He knocked once. The woman who opened the door was no more than 5 feet tall, with salt and pepper hair tied into a bun, and eyes that studied him with sharp precision. "Yes," she asked. "Good evening. My name is William Langford. I believe your grandson Micah's been spending time with my daughter at the park." Her expression softened slightly. "You're Ella's father?" "Yes." She stepped aside. "Come in." The living room was warm but modest. A crochet blanket hung over the couch. Pictures of Micah at various ages were pinned to the wall. The air smelled of lemon and old wood. "I'm Josephine, Micah's grandmother." They sat, talked, and for the next hour, William learned more than he'd expected. Josephine had raised Micah since he was 2. His mother had passed away from cancer. His father was never in the picture. They lived off her retirement check and what she made cleaning the local library. But despite the hardship, she spoke of Micah with unwavering pride. "He's a gentle soul," she said. "Always has been. But not many kids see that. He gets picked on, teased for being quiet. But I've taught him sometimes the best gift you can give someone is just to be still with them. William swallowed. Those words stayed with him the whole ride home. That night, Ella didn't go straight to her room. She came into the kitchen where William was cleaning up and placed something on the counter. It was a leaf, folded carefully into the shape of a butterfly. It started like any other day. The air was crisp. Birds chirped somewhere above the trees, and the old swings creaked gently in the morning breeze. William and Ella arrived at Crescent Park right on time just after lunch. Micah was already there drawing something in the dirt with a stick. A dragon maybe, or a horse with wings. Ella ran, actually ran to him. William froze, almost missing it. She hadn't run like that in years. She knelt beside Micah, pulled a flat stone from her pocket, and placed it next to his drawing like it was part of the scene. And then she laughed, a soft, breathy giggle. It didn't last more than a second, but it echoed inside William's chest like a cathedral bell. He stood completely still, afraid to blink, afraid the moment might vanish like a dream. Micah turned to her, surprised but smiling. He handed her the stick. Ella took it and drew a sun. A crooked, oversized sun with too many rays. She tilted her head, looked at it, then whispered barely audible, "Too big." William dropped his coffee. It hit the ground and splashed across his shoes, but he didn't care. He stumbled forward, his voice caught in his throat. "What?" he breathed. Ella looked up at him. She didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She met his eyes and repeated softly, clearly, "Too big." He knelt in the dirt beside her, tears already brimming. "You're talking," he said almost to himself. Ella tilted her head. "I missed you," she whispered, then added even softer, "Daddy." It broke him. William didn't care who saw. He didn't care that he was a billionaire in a $1,000 coat, kneeling in the dirt with tears streaming down his face. He pulled her close gently like she might disappear and held her tighter than he'd held anyone in years. Micah watched them quiet and calm, his small hands still drawing circles in the dust. He didn't interrupt, didn't smile, just nodded as if he'd known all along that this moment would come, as if he'd been waiting for it. Later that evening, William called Josephine. He could barely get the words out. But when he told her what had happened, and the woman on the other end of the line went silent for a long while, then she exhaled and her voice cracked. "That boy," she said. "That boy's got something the world doesn't understand. It's not magic. It's not science. It's just stillness." The next day the story might have ended there, but it didn't. Because when William brought Ella back to the park, something had shifted. The world had started paying attention. That morning, Ella had spoken a full sentence. She had told her father, "I want to see Micah." 5 words. 5 more than the past 3 years combined. And William, still overwhelmed, had given her anything she wanted. He stopped at the toy store, let her pick a new book, even stopped for ice cream. But when they arrived at the park, Micah wasn't there. Ella stood frozen near the tree. Her smile faded. Her fingers curled into the hem of her sweater. She looked around then at her father. Her lower lip trembled. "Where's Micah?" she asked. "I'm not sure," William said gently. "Maybe he's running late." They waited. Minutes passed. An hour. Then 2. Still no sign of the boy. Ella didn't speak again that day. On the ride home, she held the toy in her lap untouched. The next afternoon, William went to the neighborhood behind the laundromat. He knocked on Josephine's door. No answer. He knocked again. Finally, a neighbor appeared from across the street, an older man with paint-splattered overalls. "They're not home," he said. "Ambulance came last night. Took her in. The kid, too." William's heart dropped. What happened, don't know details. Something with her lungs. The boy went with her. Real polite kid. William thanked him and got back in the car. His hands were shaking. He called every hospital in the area, used every contact he had. Finally tracked them down to a small community hospital across town, one that didn't even have a website. He arrived within the hour. The receptionist wouldn't give him any details until he mentioned he was there for a boy named Micah and that he brought medical coverage. Suddenly doors opened. He was led to a quiet pediatric waiting room where Micah sat alone, clutching a worn-out stuffed bear. His clothes were rumpled, eyes tired. But he stood when he saw William. "Is Ella okay?" Micah asked immediately. William blinked, startled. "She's fine. She was just..." Worried about you. The boy nodded slowly. My grandma's really sick, I heard. I'm so sorry. Micah looked down. She said it's bad this time. Real bad. She doesn't want me to see. William knelt beside him. You can stay with us, he said, surprising even himself. Micah looked up. Just for a while, William added, until she gets better. Ella would like that. Micah hesitated. His lip quivered. Okay. That night, for the first time ever, William Langford tucked in 2 children. Ella curled up beside Micah in her butterfly-covered bed, her tiny hand resting on his arm. William stood at the door staring at the impossible scene. 2 kids from 2 worlds, one shattered by silence, the other holding the glue, and somehow they had begun to heal together. The house had never felt so full, yet it had never been so quiet. Josephine was now resting in the sunroom, wrapped in a soft blanket, a small oxygen machine beside her, and a faint floral scent lingering in the air. William had insisted on bringing her home, not to a hospital, not a sterile room with beeping monitors and cold metal railings, but here, where sunlight filtered through wide windows, where she could hear birds and feel wind. The doctor said it was a matter of days, maybe weeks, but Josephine was calm. I've lived long enough to see Micah smile, she told William one afternoon. And now I've lived long enough to hear Ella laugh. That night, Micah didn't eat. He didn't speak. He sat at the edge of his bed, legs curled in arms, wrapped around his knees. Ella walked in quietly. She held something in her hand. It was the butterfly leaf he had given her in the sandbox, the one she'd kept tucked in a book. She sat beside him and gently placed it in his lap. Micah didn't move. I don't want her to go, he whispered. Ella didn't speak at first. Then slowly she leaned her head on his shoulder. My mom is already gone, she said. Her voice was so soft it was barely there. I didn't say goodbye. Micah sniffled. Me neither. They sat like that for a long time. 2 children holding more pain than most adults ever would. And yet something passed between them that didn't need words. A kind of knowing, a kind of peace. William watched from the hallway, heart heavy but eyes open. He had never seen Ella so brave. Not in therapy, not with doctors, not even with him. She had always been the one who needed comforting, but now she was the one giving it. The next day, Micah took Ella's hand and led her back to the park. He didn't speak much, but he smiled when she handed him a sketchbook. It was blank, but on the inside cover she'd written, "Your dragons need a home." They sat on the same bench near the sandbox. No guards, no fanfare, just kids. For hours they drew together. Ella made up stories. Micah added fire. She gave them names. He gave them wings. By sunset, the pages were full. When they returned, Josephine was weaker. She asked to see the drawings. Micah climbed into bed beside her and showed her each page. She smiled at everyone, even when her breath came in gasps. Keep drawing, she whispered. I will, Micah promised. And take care of her. Josephine said, nodding toward Ella, who stood in the doorway. Micah glanced at her, then back. I will, he said again. Josephine smiled, closed her eyes, and let go. The funeral was small, private. No cameras, no press, just a few neighbors, a quiet priest, a boy in a suit that didn't quite fit, and a billionaire in sunglasses who didn't say a word, but held Micah's hand the entire time. Ella placed the butterfly leaf on the casket. No one asked her to. She just knew. Later that week, William received a letter. It was handwritten, folded twice, and left on Josephine's bedside table. Inside were 2 sentences. Give Micah a life he can believe in. He's already given yours back to you. William stared at the words until they blurred. He hadn't cried like that since the day Ella was born. In the weeks that followed, life changed quietly. Micah stayed. At first just for a while, then a little longer, then permanently. William remodeled the guest room into a shared bedroom, complete with bunk beds, comic book wallpaper, and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Ella spoke daily now, her voice soft but steady. Micah drew new dragons, gave them names. Let Ella pick their powers. They began attending school together. People whispered, of course. Some questioned the billionaire's decision. Why adopt a poor black kid from a laundromat? William never answered. He didn't need to, because anyone who saw Ella smile at breakfast knew. Anyone who watched Micah race down the hallway shouting "Dodd" knew. Anyone who stood in that park and saw a billionaire kneel in the dirt just to tie a little boy's shoelaces knew that something far more valuable than fortune had found its way into that home. Something that couldn't be bought, couldn't be negotiated, and couldn't be replaced. Family. A full year passed. The mansion no longer echoed with silence. It echoed with running footsteps, with laughter, with the occasional crash of Lego bricks being knocked over in the hallway. Ella had not only found her voice, she had grown into it. She now read aloud every night before bed, sometimes to Micah, sometimes to her dad, sometimes just to herself sitting by the window, the world outside glowing in golden dusk. And Micah was drawing more than ever. Dragons, castles, quiet girls with secret powers. One day, he submitted a story to the National Youth Art Expo. William didn't even know about it until the acceptance letter came. Micah's comic, titled Ella and the Silent Dragon, had been selected as a finalist. It was a story about a girl who hadn't spoken in years, and the boy who helped her remember how. At the award ceremony, parents and artists filled the auditorium. William sat in the front row, arms folded nervously in a dark suit he hadn't worn since Josephine's funeral. Ella stood beside Micah backstage, holding his sketchbook like a sacred treasure. When Micah's name was called, applause filled the room. He stepped forward, but before he could speak, he looked to Ella. She nodded once, proud, and just like that he handed her the mic. Ella paused, took a breath, and began reading aloud the first page of his comic. Once there was a girl who forgot how to speak. But deep inside, her voice was waiting like a dragon curled up and dreaming. Gasps rippled through the room, not because of the story, but because of her voice. The judges looked stunned, and William, he simply wept. That night, as the three of them walked back to the car beneath a sky full of stars, Ella looked up at her father. "Daddy," she said, "what's a legacy?" William smiled. He looked down at her, then at Micah, whose sketchbook was still clutched in his arms like gold. "A legacy," he said, "is the story you leave behind when you're gone." Ella thought for a moment. Then she said, "Then I want mine to be about Micah." Micah shook his head. "No, mine's about you." They both turned to William. "What about you, Dad?" Ella asked. William didn't answer right away. He stared up at the stars, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel alone. "My legacy," he whispered, then smiled softly. "I think it started the day I took my daughter to the park and met a boy who helped her speak." 1 year later, the final panel of Micah's next graphic novel sat finished on his desk. It showed a girl in a blue dress and a boy holding a stick. They stood in a park, and between them, a giant dragon with butterfly wings and a smile. In the bottom corner, handwritten in silver ink, it read, "Sometimes the ones we save us right back."